Awesome. Great to see you guys. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I have an amazing conversation for you all today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 578th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor. I'm the programs assistant here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Nora Khan and Cole Swensen. We're also thrilled to welcome poet Ama Birch here to close today's program. And before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that Black Lives Matter, and the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to just check the chat for a living document of resources and actions that will be shared. Today's conversation will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you can view the full archive of this NSE series. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Curator, editor, and writer Nora N. focuses on criticism on digital visual culture, the politics of software, and philosophy of emerging technology. She is the executive director of Project X for Art and Criticism, publishing Extra Contemporary Art Journal in Los Angeles. She's also a curator for the next Biennale de L'Image and Movement in 2023, hosted by the Center of Contemporary Art in Genève. I definitely cannot speak French, so that wasn't too bad. Khan's most recent short book is Seeing, Naming, and Knowing, published by the Brooklyn Rail, on the logic of machine vision, and we will share a link to that in a moment. Cole Swensen is the author of 17 volumes of poetry and a collection of critical essays, Noise That Stays Noise. A former Guggenheim Fellow, she has been a finalist for the National Book Award and has been awarded the Iowa Poetry Prize, the SF State Poetry Center Book Award, and the National Poetry Series. She has also translated over 20 volumes of poetry, prose, and art criticism from French, and won the 2004 PEN USA Award in literary translation. Thank you so much, Cole and Nora, for joining us today. I'm just so excited to pass the mic over to you, Cole.
And thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to do this. I've been looking forward to it for weeks, just to get a chance to talk with you, Nora, and explore some of your work. It's a little bit difficult because you do so much and such a wide range of things. And we're going to try and cover some of that range today, but we're not going to get to all of it. But I'd like to start with a comment that you made in a 2019 talk at Brown, when you spoke about creating, quote, models of how we actually treat each other in isolation. And as a comment that was made about 3 months before COVID arrived, it seemed amazingly prescient. And I wondered how the actual experience of isolation compared to those models, and wondered if you could just tell us a bit about that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Cole, so much for that. It's so nice to be joining you after 14 years since we last saw each other in Iowa. And I wanted to thank everyone for coming today, in the middle of your day, busy days, I'm sure. And thanks to the Brooklyn Rail for hosting us so beautifully. It's been a pleasure to see these pieces over the pandemic. So Cole, to that question about that talk, when I look back at 2019 and where I was in 2019, where we were, I had been writing for some time at that point about the ways we communicate in isolation, meaning I'd always been writing and thinking and reviewing and interested in the kinds of thinking and relation that technology and technological experiences induce. And for me, that relationship is often one of pretty intense isolation, or often it produced in response to isolation. And so anonymity online and the kind of brutal language that you might see, in a thread or in the comments section, which you're never supposed to read, but I always read. That kind of language that anonymity makes possible allows us to really reflect on the starkness of our different ideologies and positions as we debate like political issues, or try to describe our positions and experiences to someone far away. We have this in between us. So at that moment in 2019, it was really like a moment of political term and different camps forming and hardening. Chronic loneliness was entering the cultural conversation at the time. And when I was working on that talk and that book that came after the Rail book, I was thinking a lot about the ethics of the language we use with one another when no one is watching or when we are anonymous. That was what I'd been writing on. And there's a quote that's up on the screen, an idea that's been really important for me is this idea of vicariance, which is a concept from Alma Birch in this really beautiful book called The Vicarious Brain, Creators of Worlds. And it's about the brain's capacity to model and to simulate and build worlds and simulate futures, and to further like simulate other people's mental models and worldviews. And so in thinking about technology for the last 10 years, I've been, as I zoom out on my own practice, I've also been focused on mental models of the world that we hold and manage and mediate through technology, as they form our, tastes and preferences, our ethics, our traumas and experiences, and how we can revise those mental models. So this act of projecting that we're doing right now, like where I'm, imagining you are real paired with like my reading of your poems over the years and experiences we might have shared at some point in the past. And you imagine me as real, and we have to do this kind of constant vicariance work. It's empathy work, and everyone in this room is doing that right now. So in writing about how we talk to people online and how we read and think and consume the text online in our various bubbles, and how we think about others from those bubbles as tech and technological mediation becomes our norm, was a long process in place that, leading up to the pandemic, just activated and formalized these experiences that were very much being put into place. So from surveillance to tracking and tracing, to harassment and effects of working and thinking almost exclusively online. So as I was teaching at RISD at the time, and as we went to teaching online, this work of negotiating between my students' mental models and other people's political models and ideological models, sometimes in sync with one's own, sometimes in conflict, it became really important during the pandemic to be able to bridge that isolation. And we were talking earlier this week about COVID models and the fury over the changing models. And I've started to be able to connect how, people who I work with, who work with games and world building and simulation, their artistic practice, often had a little bit of an easier time negotiating between the different theories being projected down, because they work with building simulations and models and revising them constantly. And this really became part of like my teaching and writing practice, is how do we take in new events based on the context and pass, changing official information, pass understanding, to understand that predictions are changing constantly. We have to adjust in relation to them. So between those two pieces, I think of writing itself as an act of vicariance, of creating a world between two people, a kind of like house or small house. Maybe you can talk about that too. A virtual house that you walk them through all of the weird rooms, and then you say goodbye at the end. And this last 2 years of intense, sustained isolation, interpersonally, we're still working through it. I find myself taking a lot of care to balance the mental models and be able to take and discard information when certain models don't work. That's been very crucial for me. And I've been thinking of that as a kind of criticism or criticality that's activated the ability to discern and frame and bring care to every interaction and analyze the systems that we're in together. And there's something about the remove and the anonymity that allows that and get like kind of directly to the point. And so it became really important in teaching, in which we like simulated the classroom space, we simulated each other, we really worked to think about and share each other's and like hold each other's like precarity and models and lives to be able to connect even more closely. So I guess that was a kind of model of how to treat each other in isolation that I learned over the last couple of years, and was trying to pair it with what I did before.
Great, thank you. I'm going to curve a little bit more directly back to the 2019 Rail publication, the Seeing, Naming, Knowing, and kind of go forward with that, because I was interested in the role that anonymity plays, particularly in the kind of disquiet caused by the increasing prevalence of machine observation, which you deal with so well in that book. I was thinking, we've always been watched. Human beings have always watched one another, and all animals are always watching one another. Desire, fear, curiosity, any number of reasons. But machine observation introduces a major difference in that it's no longer a living being that's doing the watching. So we've kind of detached the watching from the watcher. And it seems that there's something terrifyingly isolating in that alone. It creates maybe an unprecedented kind of anonymity. And I wondered how that mapped onto the anonymity that you were just mentioning and speaking about. It's a kind of anonymity that seems to be observation stripping people of all their particularities. And I just wondered, could you comment on the interconnections between particularly surveillance and vulnerability, anonymity, and isolation?
Amazing question. Thank you for the first hard-hitting questions right for the get. I have to say also that phrase you used, I think it was all animals have always watched each other, is, you know, a title that I would love to preserve at some point with credit if possible. The last year, to this point, the last year I was working on a book about AI art and art generated by machines and machine learning, which is kind of a continuation and follow up to the Rail publication to actually answer this question of what do we do with this unprecedented anonymity, this dislocation, this like hovering partial knowledge that we always have now, that we're being seen and tracked and traced, which has, you know, been accreted in slow, like kind of accretive steps integrated into like our day-to-day awareness. So how do we live with this partial knowledge, meaning we aren't privy to the how always, but we know that the presence is there? And how have we always lived with things that we don't really know, things which are anonymous to us or partially known to us? Who am I, or who are you, unseen or unknown to? And how has surveillance and self-surveillance and been embedded in the fabric of our world for a really long time, as you just described? So, you know, the precise moment that we're in right now, where, you know, there are lots of studies done on how a lot of people know about, you know, how they're tracked and surveilled, whether it's in through their smartphones or the general use of the internet, or even if you abandon technology altogether, there are many ways that you know, algorithmic systems retain a knowledge of you, or you can still have a knowledge of you. And so knowing that the stripping of the specifics of your life is happening, knowing that you appear as a set of qualities of data based on the places you've moved through the digital or virtual sphere, it's always been a strategic game that I think we've been playing. You know, there are amazing writers and poets like, you know, Jackie Wang, and I think of Ruha Benjamin or Ramona Morrow, who write about machine observation as a continuance of statistics and actuarial science. So these like systems of tracking and sorting and prediction of human possibility that like made computer science possible were crystallized and formalized in like the Macy's conference and World War II, right around World War II, that gathered like Norbert Wiener and von Neumann and Margaret Mead and literary critics and psychologists to think about, the future of computing and computation. So these ideas of tracking, tracing, essentializing were built into computational systems and are like the basis of statistics. So it's a foundation of what we have today. How we like sort and type each other, and that is then reflected in machines. So following the continuance, I think, makes the question of vulnerability in anonymity a little bit more manageable, is to know that is a continuance of a long-term process. So I guess the questions that I find really important to ask then, once you have that knowledge, is what strategies do we deploy or use when we know we're being read and tracked and surveilled and being misread in that tracking? Glissant's right to opacity is what, interestingly, such a high, majorly cited reference in surveillance studies, the right to be illegible, or the right to be not read. But even so, even more, we might ask, who gets to watch, who gets to police, to track, and to see, and how do we watch back? Those are the critical questions about like how surveillance is distributed unevenly. How do we surveil and police one another, and how do we counter the ways we're trained into doing so? I think there's a slide some back before these like ocean images, which I think we'll be talking about in a bit. A piece I worked on over the last year was for this journal called Women in Performance that was themed race, vision, and surveillance. It was about the act of, catching ourselves in the act of surveilling others in this kind of flat and essentializing way, and taking on the violence of anonymity. Because the seeing by machines is often unseen, and the watcher is not one that you can look back on, what we do have access to are the systems that humans build and their logic and their code. And sometimes this can be engineered and reconstructed after a disaster, and there's an entire field of AI ethics that demands explainability, and that like the black box of machine learning be open and revealed. But the deeper philosophical questions of what kind of explainability of technology is even useful to us, and how we, when I say we, meaning just like the majority of people, learn to live with this knowledge and have been living with this knowledge, is just as important as explication. So I think even if you were to know exactly how you were traced through a day and how your information was used, and it was explained perfectly back to you, and you were given the entire 200 pages of technical explanation, I think it's also important to question the underlying paradigm of extraction of data to form models of us and our capability and future action. It's like the actual active control and prediction of populations and communities, the poor, the disenfranchised, like that capitalist supremacist logic that's buried beneath is actually what needs to be explained. And the truth, these claims to truth and neutrality that science and computation often make, like as anyone who uses a smartphone is being trained in understanding this logic. And that's the kind of, I think, roving criticality, like a responsive criticality in the moment, that I think we're becoming more savvy with as a culture. And writing, of course, also restores us from anonymity and isolation, and counters all of these sometimes terrifying things, the refusal of typing.
Great. And I urge everyone to read this small book, because you walk out all of these things and their ramifications and potentialities in such a graceful and understandable way. So I'm going to segue now into a completely different realm, because I want to make sure, again, that we cover a range of what you do. And I want to touch on the aesthetic a bit. And in a talk you did at the ICA in Miami, you said something about the beauty of unmediated experience versus the digital and the mediated. And I noticed that you didn't say the beauty of unmediated experience versus the beauty of the digital and the mediated. And I just wondered how you see beauty in relation to the digital and the mediated. Is it possible? Is it impossible? Are its possibilities different? Is its nature different?
It's a great question. I think, looking back at these images from that residency, it was just this 1 month on an island called Fogo, where I was starting to think about this question of the beauty of the digital and the mediated. And I think in retrospect, one of the things I was really wrestling with in writing that book and that island and that place is this persistent notion of the insufficiency of digital experience, or the virtual, that it pales in comparison to this direct, epic, romantic experience of a landscape, which is not something I actually feel, but I think maybe I mean that phrase with a little nod to the false binary, but the binary persists nonetheless between the physical and tactile and off-screen experience as more substantial or real, and that there's an insufficiency or an impoverished nature to the digital. But of course, that's been deconstructed by many people. And we know that we are, or I feel that we are moved and shaken by, our experiences of moving images and, the false or true narratives that happen in mediated spaces. In fact, like a lot of my writings around the way that emotional intensity is amplified by the design of mediated spaces. So obviously we saw this in the elections, the way that, emotions get harnessed and be collectively spread, in an hour's time or 10 minutes time, and votes and policy and politics are shifted by that affective economy. So tech and its mediation have invited like a lot of parsing of that, of how does that concentration shift and move people and their decisions in, incredible ways at scale. Beyond that, the digital and the virtual has always been, just replete with beauty, and maybe aesthetic surprise or surprise is the way I would describe it. I think so much of my time as an arts writer and critic is spent with artists and filmmakers and musicians who work with software and game engines and models, and often like started as programmers and coders, and then found art as this way to hold strange experiences or things that were outside of what they were maybe trained to do, a place to experiment, a place to play. And I think my responsibility or role as a writer is to elevate their work and uplift the worlds that they work with, the digital or virtual worlds, as having these narrative moments of beauty, moments that couldn't happen anywhere else, moments that can't be described very well or refuse language. I think those are the most exciting moments for me, is when I can't capture it well, or I can't, I find something aesthetically compelling, but I don't actually know what I'm looking at. Like haunted moments that we have with technology, super psychologically fraught moments. My start in writing about technology was actually just writing about games, and played games for a really long time, and worked on a video game magazine, I think in 2009, 2010, as an online editor. I've seen people get married in video games. I've seen people cope with parents, their parents passing, like with total strangers who are networked all around the world. People find ways to create, pray and resolve traumatic events, because there's like VR spaces and systems that are actually like constructed to help people recreate an event and actually resolve the groove in their brain, which keeps revisiting an event. So, there's a constant confrontation with possibility and potential, despite the surveillance apparatus and despite algorithmic prediction. It's the joy that, of course, makes it appeal to the field, appeal to artists. And so I think what I try to carve out space for, even with the knowledge of what is, the grim aspects of technologies, are all the possibilities for language and critical thinking that the digital and the mediated make space for. So if we think of the digital or the virtual as a mirror back into our culture, just as art is, with a peculiar capacity to hold everything that we do and present it back to us in real time with real data. Of course, language is a kind of mediation, writing is mediation. I won't belabor like the computational metaphors, but writing is often described as a technology or an interface. I'll just leave that there. But to mediate one's thinking and expression digitally, every moment is to every moment have a chance to think of who you're reaching, your tone, immediacy, audience, like everyone here, reception, and it's an acting out of that vicariance. Like I write and I mediate to bridge and think virtually to get to other people or think with other people. And so I think in editing and writing reviews and criticism about contemporary art and art now, I find more and more young writers come to the arts and come to arts writing through writing online and through writing almost exclusively online and not even necessarily seeing shows in person. I mean, often a lot of folks, and I, myself included, write about shows that we have videos and photos and maybe a shaky walkthrough with the artist or like a little Zoom in their studio. You have to reconstruct everything in detail through the language and through the images and through the textures. And in many ways, it's more of a, it really demands a lot of you to be able to, because you feel this huge responsibility for not being there, and has created this rangy style and critical voice. I think is just good. We're going to maybe look back at this time and think about. So yes, there's lots of beauty in in the digital, to be sure.
Right. Because we're looking at the photos of Fogo Island, and that residency seems to have been a kind of pivotal moment maybe on some of your thinking. I'd love to give you a chance to talk a bit about that experience. And I was remembering that you mentioned that you, that you found instances in this completely, relatively unmediated space, a space that has had relatively little human intervention, that you didn't expect to find in the books of other previous residents any mention of artifice or the artificial. And yet, when you actually went in and read the books, you found almost every one of them directly addressed, evoked, and used notions of artifice and the artificial. And I was wondering if there might be something about the kind of brutal confrontation with unmediated, unhumanized space, which we rarely get these days, that made people, maybe yourself included, think about, be able to picture artifice in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely formative and has really shaped my practice over the last few years. And I keep going back to that time because I came to this this place that you're looking at pictures of with the intent of writing about technological systems and the artifice of it, and also photography and writing. I had a lot of different plans when I came there, but they all felt so starkly in contrast, and very much like a kind of coping mechanism. So you're not swallowed alive by the unmediated experience of this ocean and this really beautiful landscape. And you're also sitting in front of the ocean most of the days, and it's beating and kind of roiling up against the rocks. It's the like North Atlantic, the space you're living in is moving with the ocean. These studios at Fogo are big tourist attractions. So people are peering in almost every hour and knocking on the glass as you're, you feel like a little circus clown, like typing. And so like, there's like a farcical aspect of it, and like feels very divorced from what's there. Like, why am I on a computer right now when I could be, out there? So I think in the writing, I was really trying to integrate it all and make it all make sense. It felt funny to be writing about AI and machines in this setting. But of course, like the thinking would have to be changed by the space and the place. So wandering this, I don't know how to describe this landscape, but I would come to this lake a lot. And, was thinking about, a page that I'd been writing about algorithms or prediction. And, I was more aware of what had brought me to that space and what I had brought with me in my head that was shaping the land I was walking on. So of course I was connecting different landscapes and vantage points to simulated landscapes because of the hyper real beauty that looked machine made. And because film and special effects and CGI are so good that they have a hyper real like light and sound and atmosphere. You know, everything from like how the wind touches the surface of water to how water moves is, I mean, as real as it can get, and it's getting better by, you know, by the day. So I think the act of mediating through language and, you know, I imagine I could see other residents also battling the place with their practice, this place that felt like a cinematic set, and made one's efforts of, you know, scrawling or etching or trying to erect anything seem, you know, a little hilarious. So the act, I think, of translation, of trying to construct a sense of the place, automatically this made this space psychogeographic. Like every space that you walk by on a hike to, you know, your studio, it like would deepen the grooves in your brain. And so for me, the act of mapping, or the politics of constructing a map, really began to come to the forefront for me. It's like, how do I enter a space like this? How do I connect with people here? What have I brought with me? What political position have I brought with me? What am I projecting? Probably a lot. You name a place, you keep reiterating the name, and then the space like grows in your mind. But then, you know, I started to run these like writing workshops, and there was this poet named Marlene Kreitz, who is a Newfoundland poet who's really, really well known in Fogo and Newfoundland, who stays on the same, I think it's like 16-acre property that she has, and she stays on her property and writes poems by walking the property and trying to remember how she's named it the day before, and like keeps this like meticulous practice of writing out these kind of like psychological maps of the space. And so I think the, you know, artifice for me is also it's the construction of a residency is an artificial setup. There's it can sometimes feel like the model of what writing should be. You should be alone in isolation in the wild with just your mind, as terrifying as it can get. But writing has definitely been that for me, but writing about art has been a way to form community and to be with other people, to think with others. And so I ran these like writing and mapping workshops with 12 people to help me loosen my practice and loosen that map. And, you know, to think through the place together in real time and look at our mapping and simulation of it in real time, which is also also writing. It's also an extension of a writing or critical practice, as I thought of it. And so it was a way to move out of like the isolation of writing and criticism into the expanded field around it, like the community and the conversation, which is, you know, what keeps some of us here, I'm sure. Yeah.
Actually, this is a great moment to segue. I want to talk to you more about writing. And because I know you did an MFA in fiction at Iowa. And since I've written in many genres, from game theory and game criticism to opera libretto to all sorts of different art critic, etc., so many different genres. And now I know you're leaning even a bit toward the memoir, which is a new direction. And so I just wanted to ask you about genre, open-ended question there. You seem to have an uncommon genre fluidity and a capaciousness. And I wondered, what do you see that enabling? And particularly, how do you see it maybe related to the future of criticism?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. I think that, you know, being light with the demands of genre was necessary for me. And I think it definitely started at Iowa. I had teachers who said that who were essential in fiction, but a lot of like our debates and conversation, as like workshop debates and conversation can go, were about what genre does this piece fit in? What is this mix that you're doing? Or and it was friendly and constructive, but it was interesting to think of where is the space where you can mash all of these things together and mash different subjects and play and experiment. And so while we learned a lot about genres and I could recognize them, I think a lot of the subjects I was interested in weren't respectful of genre. and the subjects that I was interested would shift and emerge and had a life of their own, especially when you're talking about technology. It moves according to its own desires. It shifts the frame, it demands the frame shift, and it demands a kind of hybridity. And I think a lot of the experience I would have reviewing certain artists working with software or technology or games or AI, there would be critical analysis, but they would also induce awe, or they would like cast the viewer aside. And the works had their own visuality and their own psychological relationship that they would induce. They were super deeply emotional, hard to track. They would intensify and concentrate. They involved a lot of deep cognitive play. But as a writer, to describe all of these events was it was a continuous fiction exercise in some ways. It's all fiction work to world build and create a world in writing that approaches that experience, and probably failing, but at least try to capture all the psychological dimensions. So for me, the systems I spend so much time looking at are designed to be in relation, and your computer and your smartphone and all the things the devices that you might use, people sit around, think super carefully about how your senses will be harnessed, how it'll be timed to certain desires that you have throughout the day, when you're hungry, when you're hangry, when you are sad. I mean, this is information that companies have. And, it's sync and train with you as a user, if we're all users at least at this moment, into text like design and presets, its goals, its intentions and aims. So the harder that what I was writing about was to steer track, and the more veiled it was, as much of algorithmic practice and design are, the more important it was that language moved with it and bent and split and warped. And so this became tied to me with working between genres and working at the seams and the edges, and using criticism or using narrative, a theory from here, or memoir when you need it, speculation when you need it, narrative, and back again. And so the uncanny and strange subject, it would demand its own language. And so I've always found arts writing is a great container for this. It's a great container for getting to do a little bit of what almost anything you want, of course, with editing and care. And so I think our arts writing and artists writing is what taught me this style of criticism of hybridity. Arts writing was where that was possible, and experimentation, style, and voice was possible, or at least it could be explored in the way that I needed to talk about tech. And so I often found a lot of writers doing the same and developing. This field has developed over the last 10 years of experimental critical writing about technology. And I think of it as a form of access to these huge ideas that are technical and often very removed. The idea that there are any right ways to write about technology, to write about haunting and ghosts and mirrors of AI, it's not quite in place. There's not an idea of a correct kind of language for feeling calm to your soundscape, your synthesized soundscape when you fall asleep, whether it's your rainscape or cloudscape, or how to describe the voices that you hear and speak to all day through your computer, but you have no referent for and no body for. We have to invent words for that. We have to invent concepts for feeling nudged towards things you realize you actually do want, and what it feels like to be nudged. And there are concepts and words that are yet to be invented. So I think the fluidity between genres has been essential for that.
Right, yeah. Actually, it's probably time to turn to the future at this point. You've got this exciting new position at Project X Foundation, and I'm sure you're imagining a lot of different things you could do. And my first question is, how do you see the aspects of your AI interests and your gaming interests, et cetera, working with the Project X Foundation's agenda? And if you want to expand to talk about other things with the Project X Foundation, feel free to do that too. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I knew Extra and its mission and the journal through just writing and life as a critic. I think I really turned to Extra when Arya Dean, who is a colleague at Rhizome, who's a curator and writer, started publishing more with Extra. And I learned that Project X Foundation for Art and Criticism was the foundation that supports the journal, that makes it possible. And its role is also to expand its mission to create, forums for diverse writing, for this kind of experimental writing that we're talking about. And I was particularly intrigued to see Extra's long history of supporting experimental writing. You're looking at a bunch of the covers from the past, and I think we just passed some slides with, there's been incredible writing that you can find in the archive, which is free and online, by Jack Halberstam, and early pieces by Lorraine O'Grady, and memoir style pieces from Pope L. And, all the work is edited by this incredibly passionate and rigorous editorial board. They turn every idea and piece and line over and over again, in the light, to make space for that hybrid kind of writing. And so my thinking about what we've been discussing so far, and just in this the last discussion about the role of criticism and artist writing as this place for expansive practice for young writers to test new ideas and test out new styles, it really comes from the mission and ethos of Project X, which is to continue to make that space possible, and to respond to our time in which a lot of these spaces are, collapsing. So I think of the organization as one that supports critical, expansive writing and thought, but also that practice of critical analysis is practice within the organization. Like, we turn it on ourselves. And so in trying to integrate these two seemingly different genres of work, the work with AI and the work with this new role in this foundation, this community of almost 25 years, we're reaching the 25th anniversary. I'm only been at the job for 2.5 months, so I'm trying to keep things tight here and not overstate things. But I think I see the work with AI as it relates to the future societies that we'll live in, the institutions that will have the kinds of methods of distributing writing, publishing, and circulating it that are fully at play and will continue into the next 5 years and the next 10 years as directly tied to the system of criticism and writing, or the ecology of criticism and writing, as spaces for criticism either collapse or fold because of some of the technocratic values we've talked about. This idea that hear this a lot in tech spaces, that criticality or criticism is negative rather than loving, or I think of it as loving or an expression of care. You don't spend 7,000 words and 50 hours on an idea that you don't care really, really deeply about. But as certain neoliberal or technocratic values make spaces for criticism harder and harder to sustain, having a system that makes writing as a profession sustainable is crucial. So making space for writing about strange things, or strange on the edge, things on the edge, things that experimental styles in ways that don't guarantee your life security, and having the time to do it well and the space to do it well is really, I think, what we're advocating for. So I actually see them as very paired. I think of the work of questioning AI or tech's vision for what society should be and who we should be as necessarily countered by many voices and criticism. I think some of the old models of criticism of one very formal grandstanding position versus another is a little less strategic, because how can criticism be practiced in a collective way by many people as a set of methods or tools to evaluate the unseen or the unknown, or this not yet captured thing we've been talking about, whether it's an artwork or whether it's the anonymous voice. So I think of them as deeply tied.
We have time for just a little bit more. I wondered about when you project and imagine 10, 15 years from now, what do you dream of the Project X Foundation doing that may be different or may add to what they're already doing?
The 10 to 15-year plan, I like that. That's good, especially for an arts nonprofit. I think what I would love to see is that Project X continues and maintains Extra's track record. I think of working with writers who are really right on the cusp of needing that additional push in their career. I think that's really what has excited me in my first few months at the organization. When you look back through the archives, you see, reviews of Patty Chang, who's, feminist performance icon. You see reviews of her early shows. See a residency that Project X gave to Johanna Hedva, who wrote this really seminal piece called Sick Woman Theory. And I think maybe we just passed that slide. And so I think we're in this position coming on 25 years where the organization's put in the labor, the time, the love, the thinking, and the work to consider its role moving forward into the next years. To even get to think along a timescale that long is very exciting. How do you maintain experimental writing and spaces for this expanded field around art, the talking with other people about art, the thinking about art with other people long-term? We hope to continue to find very interesting writers who want to experiment, put this time into their writing, invest in the process that our editors put into the process of developing the essays, and we're here to support that. And I'd also love to see us become a place that young writers come to and pitch to and look forward to the conversation, these beautiful conversations that happen with our editors. A couple of more things. I think another is to really formalize the process of support for young writers who are looking to experiment or to even learn how to find space to experiment. This work is just very difficult. It's difficult to write across genres. I see young writers burn out or discouraged by the whole process of pitching and maybe getting rejected or going through an editorial process that doesn't work out. I think a lot of writers just drop off because it's not just in general in the field. So I think our focus in this coming year is to really acknowledge the time it takes to write that 6,000 to 7,000 word essay, that piece that can really define your career or can define your thinking and your path forward. I've seen that piece brings writers opportunities and connections and ways to live. So to that end, this fall, we're starting an editorial fellowship, and we're going to be funding 2 individuals to join our editorial process and take part in our editorial meetings, learn from the editors who are Extra's editors, are curators, they're professors or longtime editors. And the fellow will also get a chance to write a long form piece that goes through the process. So it's one bit to expand our editors and writers. And the second is to have our organization reflect the diversity of Los Angeles, one of the richest cities demographically in the US. And so part of this is acknowledging how difficult it is to have a career as a writer and an editor. So we're raising fees for artists and stipends for our editors, but we're also starting to develop partnerships with small libraries and partner arts and research nonprofits in Los Angeles that are also part of this expanded field and discussion around art. A lot of the conversations we're having internally around, how do you teach the basics of writing and reviewing? How do you pitch? How do you navigate the editorial process? Even coming out of a writing MFA, I didn't know how to do any of these things because we were so deep in the text and these workshops, but the business or just how to live as a writer often came through, anecdotes or researching the lives of other writers. But I left without connections or guideposts, or not through my own family and community. I didn't have a model for how to live as an artist or creative. And so I think it's crucial for organizations like ours to really invest in that long-term mentorship and development. I guess finally, I really see us, as we're looking at the images from our archive, I hope for us to start to articulate what criticism in Los Angeles is through the eyes of our journal, all of these unique, weird and rangy qualities that our writing often focuses on, and long-running focus on feminist performance, on speculative and science fiction, on art and technology, subculture, like punk, are particular to LA and particular to Southern California. but also the specific style of artist writing that comes out of Los Angeles, which is very rangy and expansive and thoughtful and slow. So, I mean, I'm only at the beginning of this. So for me, the question of how do you enter a 25-year archive thoughtfully and look carefully at one's moments of entry, and how do you contextualize a work from 2003 or 1998 in relation to conversations that are happening now in the art world in a thoughtful way. So we'll be doing a lot of that work in public and thinking in public, which I see as one thing I can contribute from my practice through columns and activations around LA and partners, and also in partner cities and partner arts nonprofits. So the writing takes its time. If folks have a chance to look through Extra, I really invite everyone to, and to look through our archive. And I think just as the writing takes the time, the organization should also create the space for that slow and deep thinking to happen, hopefully for a long time to come, 10 to 15 years.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for just all the great range of ideas and thoughts and images that you brought up for all of us. And I'm sure there are tons of questions. So I'll turn it over now to Eleanor to manage the Q&A part.
Thank you so much, Cole.
Sorry, thank you so much, Nora. Thank you, Cole. That was a really amazing conversation to hear and to witness. So grateful. We do have some audience questions.
Oh, wow.
So I will pass the mic over to Kim Schoen for our first question. Kim, you should be able to unmute in just a moment.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, sorry for my blank screensaver, Nora. I've just got a bunch of stitches in my leg and I'm laid up in bed. So I'm not camera ready, but thank you for that conversation. And Cole, I really enjoyed that. And one question came up for me. I'm an artist and a writer. I've worked with Extra for a long time, and I'm working on something now where I've been reading Hannah Arendt on thinking and moral considerations. And I just was curious how, if I know this is a rather large question, but maybe there's a small way into it about the change of thinking and knowing, and the relationship between thought and knowledge, or the practice of thinking, and what it means to know now in light of AI, just in general. So however you wish to answer, I would love to hear.
Thank you, Kim. I'm sorry for the stitches. Thanks for coming to this talk regardless. It's a huge question. I think I could start by saying, I think this might have been put in the chat, but this school that I'm working on with Maya Ganesh, the AI Anarchies Autumn School, actually took up this question as its core thesis, namely how our ways of thinking and knowing changing in relation to computation, to machine learning, to AI. And one thing that has always been fascinating about conversations about AI are the debates, the myths, the storytelling, and the anxiety around it. And the more that you dig into it, the more that you find that even as AI becomes more knowable, or this field of explainable AI becomes more developed, so you can explain a mathematical process, you can explain a computational process, the anxiety still remains. And so one thing that is really fascinating working with AI scientists and machine learning programmers is the responsibility that I think many feel in the kind of methods of knowing or tracking the world, or tracing, or description, whether of images or the moving image or sound, or the immense amount of data that unsupervised learning and OpenAI is taking in. There is a sense of responsibility and about how this method of knowledge making and tracing is shaping our ways of speaking and knowing. So I think I mentioned at some point the AI as a mirror, which is like a pretty well used metaphor. AI reflects back to ourselves what is happening in our time, our anxieties about technology, how we actually engage with it, and what we want from it. But further, it like reflects back that you can, because you can trace the logic, and because you can actually talk to someone, like, what are the values that you put into this system? What do you imagine it doing? It can be constantly subject to revision. I think when machine learning and AI are more, corporate focused, and all of the negative things that you hear about, how the dangers of how machine learning are used, corporations, governments, academia, like this vast pool of, I'm just like staring at your picture with these, like, I think they're dye on it. It's like a perfect picture of you looking at as we're talking about this. But I think that there's a lot of writing and thinking now about how our methods of speech and our process of thinking is being shaped by being in relation to these systems constantly. So when I talk about surveilling others, that comes out of that kind of like digital feeds that we're in, where you can have this like unearned intimacy into people's lives, and terrible things happening to people all the time. You open up Instagram or Facebook or the news, and you see directly into people's homes, directly into like the most private events that are happening in someone's life. And so it's the way that computation shapes your sense of change, or shapes your sense of what's possible, especially as predictive algorithms, for example, in like the criminal justice system, the way that a predictive algorithm is used to get a sense of whether a person will be criminal or not, that obviously shapes your sense of justice, or your sense of like who a person is and what they are capable of and what they probably would have done. I mean, which is the most, biggest barrier to justice I can think of. It makes any normative sense of justice that we have impossible. So from prediction to our sense of change and possibility to thinking in terms of computation, the more that you use it, I think those are just a few of the ways that AI and machine learning are shaping our thinking and thought. That's the most concise answer I can give. I am sure I could spend 10 years on that, but thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for that awesome question, Kim. Next question, I will be asking on behalf of Nancy Helgeson. Nancy asks, could you expand on your comment, quote, hauntings, ghosts, and mirrors of AI, end quote?
Sure. Thanks, Nancy. Well, so I think this comes from the pages and writing that I'm working on now, which are on like what is a personal path one gets to writing about these kinds of things. And for me, writing about tech and AI in the future, even though it can often seem distant or disconnected maybe from the day-to-day, or part of another realm, like the realm of elite or rare technology. I see it as very embedded in our day-to-day experience, and the path that brought one here. So I started to write this book on hybrid criticism and how AI is changing the stakes for criticism, but then ended up talking about my parents coming to this country and like coming in the middle of a war, and trauma, and their trauma of exile, experience of war, and then my dad's experience of working as a theoretical physicist who worked mainly on simulation and mainly on the future of like the universe 50 years from now, 60 years from now, and trying to integrate those things in my life has always made technology feel like a haunted subject, because it's full and replete with parents' dreams and desires, families' desires, ancestry leading you to this point, your day-to-day interactions, because they can feel very flattened and brutal, like also feel haunted, or there's lots of like lack of resolution in the day. digital ephemera. There's lots of beautiful writing on like the haunting of technology and technological artifacts. I think particularly with AI and machine learning, you start to see that mirror very clearly, especially as you study it more and read more about how it takes your information, presents it back to you. So you're constantly mirrored with your own, your actions from yesterday or the actions from 3 years before come back to haunt you or, you know, show up in your feed in a certain way. So it's mirrors of yourself that keep coming in. It's also just a turn of a phrase. I think I could dive deeper in a longer piece of writing. But yeah, often I'd say I think of technology as haunted and full of like personal ghosts, and then also like the ghosts of what it should have been.
Thank you, Nora. And thank you for that awesome question, Nancy. Our final question for our audience Q&A will be from our friend GE. GE, you should be good to unmute.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, Cole, and Nora. And I'm struggling with my question, but I want to ask it anyway. How do we disentangle these practices of technology from technocratic negatives and then begin to maybe align them with some deeper purpose?
Yes. Yeah, that's the question. It's the best. That's an awesome question. Thank you for that. I think there is so much exciting work happening now, especially with not just with artists working with technology, but like a lot of people who remember for example, the promise of the internet and the early days of it as like this, you know, wild, I won't deconstruct utopian right now, but this idea of this like unfettered space where you could access all information. And when you go back to the Whole Earth catalog and Stuart Brand, like those early ideas of what the internet could be and was maybe for a brief time are still intoxicating. Like there's still the idea that techne and the tool and will like help us engineer new worlds, access new ways of correcting social problems that have, you know, plagued us through technology is one of, I think, like especially in the West and especially in the US, is like just so tied with the frontier, with imperialism, with just constant innovation, leave the old behind, you know, move on to the frontier, start a new utopian system, city, place, or thing. And so I think one part, something that Fred Turner, probably one of my favorite writers in this book, From Counterculture to Cyberculture, talks about how those early models were built of like the late 70s communes were built into Silicon Valley's like earliest companies, like into the ethos of how systems were made. And so I think when we ask what kind of technology can we have that's not extractive, that is not based on this relentless accrual of data, we can ask of what kind of values, whether you know, local technology or one that is communally built or based around an ethos of care, privacy, non-extraction. I think there are many, like, for example, like feminist and decolonial kind of ideas of what AI and technology can look like. And a lot of them are in the realm, I think, of incredible world building thought experiments now, but, and as you pair programmers and coders and computer scientists with this like ethos of like wanting something different, like really redoing the underlying paradigm. I think there are many people thinking about this right now. I could definitely send to the real folks some resources and some names and maybe put them in the chat while you're listening to the reading.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
But yeah, it's a very, I think there's a lot of hope and energy right now of like wanting more, of having a deep love for technology and what it could be, and wanting to see a different paradigm or ethos of and set of values undergirding it. But that's what I want.
I think that's what we want. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, GE. That was an awesome question. Thank you, Nora. I think we have, looks like a maybe quicker question from Lainey and Sweeney in the chat. Says, you had to guesstimate, what date will Extra run its first 100% AI criticism?
It might not be that far away. I mean, I think a lot of the writing and headlines you read in Reuters or day to day are machine generated and then edited by editors. And I think there's a lot of incredible like computational literature and writers who are like collaborating with GPT-3. Los Angeles-based writer named K. Alado McDowell, or Kenrick McDowell, is a writer who wrote a beautiful novel called from Ignota Books, in which they collaborate with GPT-3. Pharmaco AI is the name. And so I think AI criticism is definitely on the horizon, but I don't think human art critics are going anywhere. So it'll probably be in collaboration with or alongside. But yeah, I welcome all styles.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Lainey and Sweeney, for the question. I think that is going to be our last audience question for the sake of time. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Cole, again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we do have a tradition here at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Ama Birch, to the stage. Ama is the author of 3 books, Faces in the Clouds, Sonnet Boom, and the Ferguson Interview Project, as well as a video game available for Android called Space Quake by Alma Birch. She has a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the California Institute of the Arts. And if anyone is free this Saturday, June 11th, on Zoom or in person in the Catskills, please go see Alma read with Belladonna's Lesbian All-Star Series at 4 p.m. It's going to be super cool, so check the chat for a link on that. And I will now turn the mic over to you, Alma. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Eleanor. Thank you to the Brooklyn Rail for this time together in this conversation. I'm gonna read some non-AI generated poetry. The first poem is 10 Dead in Buffalo, New York. Remembering the dawn of the Charleston 9, a fire was set that day, Black people blown away in a church, the most segregated hour, another sip to my friends in Buffalo. Smoke like a fog roll through on a trembling breath. Does he feel remorse? Is a supermarket a church? The religion of food. Foods denote culture. Are you an adventurous reader? Pushing the cart to checkout, bang. Stock person lifting a jar, bang. Woman pushing her baby stroller, bang. Smoke rises, bang. A random sneaker on the floor, bang. Glass shatters, bang. A baby cries, bang. Fog rolls, bang. Inside smoke, bang. Bodies hit the bang ground. Is this a puzzle poem? Is this a dream? A nightmare? A genocide? White supremacy is so ginormous, desperately clutching, the driver pulls out the screw. As I lay dying in the aisle of a supermarket, the cost of meat rises. Hearses once again purr. More funerals I am unable to attend. Owl for Carl. Dawn, ancient, connection, starry, night, poverty, smoking, supernatural, floating, cities, jazz, brains, angels, roofs, radiant, war, publishing, odes, underwear, burning, money, terror, wall, busted, marijuana, New York, paradise, nightmares, blind, cloud, mine, toward, Patterson, motionless, time, cemetery, dawn's joyride, blinking light tree of Brooklyn, chained subways ride, battery brain, brilliant sank, floated, listening, doom, hours, jumping, fire, moon, yakety yakking, memories, shocks, intellects, recall, meet, pavement, vanish, nowhere, of, postcards, sweats, junk, furnished, around, railroad, broken hearts, snow bop, angels, ecstasy, limousines, street light, rain, hungry, lonesome, jazz, sex, soup, eternity, volcanoes, lava, ash, poetry, beards, shorts, sexy, weeping, undressing, wailed, white, trembling, machinery, skeletons, detectives, crime, motorcyclists, joy blown, grass, parks, giggle, sob, sword, love boys, shrewd winks, sit golden, ecstatic beer, sweetheart cigarettes, beer, bed, floor, hall, fainting, vision, consciousness, million girls, sunrise, naked, lake, stolen, hero, memory, mountaintops, caves, lonely, petticoats, solipsisms, dreams, basements, offices, night, blood, blue, floodlight, crowned in oblivion, lamb crab, the river's wet push carts, music boxes, bridge rose up, flame orange scribbled, rocking, rolling, incantation, yellow stanzas, gibberish lung tortillas, pure vegetable trucks, egg, cast clocks, cut wrists, force, antique stores, cried, burnt, innocent, blast, verse, clatter, iron, fashion, the mustard gas editors, run down, soup bell fell, window, jazz, whiskey, toilet moans, ears blast, colossal whistles, highways, journey, jazz, hours, vision, 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 eternity, praying, salvation, soul, jail, for charm, heart, sang blues, Buddha, locomotive, grave, trials, left, potato salad, granite, madhouse heads, harlequin, concrete, void, protest, blood, tears, fingers, halls, echoes, soul, midnight, love, dream, nightmare, bodies, heavy moon, book, window, door, telephone room, down, yellow, rose, imaginary nothing, Carl, animal, icy flash, vibrating gaps, trapped soul, join, dash, jumping, sensation, measure, before shaking soul, rhythm, unknown, down, time, death, rose, jazz, shadow, love, saxophone, cry, radio, heart, butchered years. Last poem, something out of nothing. Pondering for too long, thinking, self-oblivion, out of nothing, universal truth, stole PPF, what matters in space, place, existence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alma. That was incredible. Definitely check out Alma's reading on Saturday and check out her work in the Rail and her books. Really amazing stuff. Thank you again to Nora and Cole for the amazing conversation and for all of your work to make today's event possible. So grateful for today, and over the past 22 years, the Book and Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and social and political meditations in our publication and our public events like our daily NSE. So please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers and operations and editors here at the Rail. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Estrelita Brodsky, Hugo Crosswaith, Jose Falcone, Ruben Ortiz Torres, and Lyle Rexer on the event of Elsewheres, a co-curated exhibition at another space. And we will conclude with a poetry reading tomorrow by Angie Trudel Vasquez. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. You can now unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, Nora. And thank you, Brooklyn Rail, for making this all work, and Fawn in particular.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you all.
Can't wait to
Thanks,
see you
Cole.
later. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alma, for the beautiful reading also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, Fawn, for inviting me.
Thanks, guys.
Yes. Please
Thanks,
keep up the
everyone.
support of Extra also, what Nora's been doing. And yeah, nice to have you back, Cole. It's nice to have this publishing in transit again. And not so sure we share the official announcement. The Terra Foundation is going to sponsor our NSE for the next 2 years. So it's nice that we can take it across the country, but also maybe Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere, you know? And that's the whole idea, is to create this massive archives so that we can share to our friends and certainly the younger generation. So that's what we are doing. So thank you for your work. Thank you so much. Can't wait to listen to later. Keep up the good work, Nora, please. Send our best to your colleagues and friends there.
Will do.
And, thank you. This is terrific. Thank you, Alma, again, Cole.
Thank you all.
And everyone
Thank
here.
you.
Norma's here. Kathleen's here. So everyone is here. Clint Crawford. Please, everyone. Keep up the good work. With much love, encourage you all.
Thank you so
Let's
much.
go have lunch.